Great. So with today's program, the content is copyrighted and may not be recorded, copied, distributed, or otherwise used without authorization from Robson Forensic. However, we do oftentimes make these videos available to stream from our website. I was commenting before we get started that we do make these available on our YouTube channel in many instances. And if you feel that a presentation, today's presentation or one similar to it, would be beneficial to your law firm or your legal organization, we can often do similar presentations for various audiences, sometimes catering the topic to whatever is of interest to you. So if you have a specific request, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, please don't be bashful, reach out and we'll see if we can make it work. Oftentimes we can. The presentation that we're here for today is injuries at childcare facilities. I've already told you a little bit about Janice, but Janice, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, including the types of cases that you're commonly involved in, that would be a great kicking off point.
That would be great. Thanks, Jesse. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Again, as Jesse shared, my name is Janice Inman, and I am a child care operations supervision expert with Robson Forensic. My education and experience in the child care field has spanned 40 years and includes working with facilities that provide care for infants through young children. I have worked in a variety of child care settings, from being a preschool teacher in the classroom to administrating various child care programs. I'm knowledgeable in state regulations for childcare, as well as the procedure for opening and operating various childcare facilities. My tenure has served as a director of programs such as private community-based preschools, corporate-owned facilities, school-age, before and after school extension programs, and faith-based programs. In my current role at Robson, I bring my background, my expertise, and a deep understanding of the childcare industry to the casework. My cases involve childcare facilities and programs across the United States. And I examine and determine standard of care such as issues of child supervision, child-adult interactions, health and safety issues, the operational procedures involved in hiring, training, managing staff, and teaching personnel, as well as the facilities' compliance with their state licensing, local and also federal health and safety regulations. Today, what we'll be discussing are various hazards that can be found in a child care environment, and if not mitigated, can result in injuries and harm to children. Jesse, next slide, please. Childcare is defined as a service that's offered in a setting that supervision and care are provided to a group of children by an individual that is not their parent or the guardian. And parents have a variety of needs. Children have various needs. And so there's a variety of venues of childcare services that are provided to them to address these needs and to care for the children. The neighborhood preschool and the childcare facility are ones that we often think of, but there's also individual caregivers that provide care for children in their homes. If a provider is caring for between 1 and 6 children, they're known as a small family childcare home. If the provider is caring for between 7 and 12 children in their residence, then they are a large family childcare home. There are also drop-in programs in the format of those care facilities and venues that we see in health clubs, shopping malls, churches, etc. And they provide care on a limited time basis. Various other organizations provide for extended care in schools, as well as summer camps and enrichment programs. A few examples of enrichment programs can be found in music studios, karate studios, dance studios, things like that. As a supervision expert, I do cover program venues with all of these areas. The next slide, please, Jesse. Regardless of the venue, it's my professional experience and widely throughout the childcare industry that the #1 priority of the childcare provider is to ensure for the safety and well-being of the group of children that are within their care. There are local, state, and federal laws, guidelines, standards that have been established for the purpose of keeping children in group care safe. Each individual state will determine the childcare licensing rules and regulations that apply in that state. There are also national childcare health and safety standards, and national organizations such as the National Organization for the Education of Young Children provide industry best practices for caregivers. Being familiar with and referring to these various regulations, standards, and guidelines is an important part of my forensic evaluative process. The next slide, please, Jesse. So keeping a group of active, curious, busy children to keep them safe is not an easy task. It requires the childcare administrators and providers to have a proactive approach as they minimize the potential hazards in the environment and establish safety plans for their programs. Listed are a variety of childcare situations that we address in our casework. Falls, for instance, can occur from high objects and equipment, such as playground equipment, things of that nature. But our young children are very active, they're very busy, and they move fast, and they do collide into things. They collide into stationary objects as well as moving objects. An example of a stationary object would be a preschooler who is riding on the bike path, not wearing a helmet, veers off the bike path, and collides with the support beam of the facility structure. Or another child who might be running through the playground, passing in front of the swings, and is struck in the abdomen by a child who's seated on the swings and active in play. Incident can also occur when there's inappropriate interactions between children and between children and adults, the latter often being those cases involving abuse or neglect. Incidents can also involve the interaction that the child has with an element in the environment, something that could cause, for instance, hot play equipment causing a burn or access to an unguarded electrical outlet. We also have cases where school buses are involved or an incident regarding a child who may have been left on a vehicle. Resulting injuries are lacerations, burns, fractures, poisoning, and abuse. Next slide, please, Jess. Excuse me. The pollen is in the air where I live, and it's affecting allergies, my voice. So I apologize in advance for
Janice,
the fog that seems to be emerging.
Yeah, you're doing great. Don't worry about it.
So my apologies. On this slide, we have a diagram that is illustrating an accident occurs and an injury occurs if a child has an unsafe interaction with a hazard and the environment. As experts, we use the forensic process to determine if there's a dangerous condition, causation, standard of care provided, notice in our casework. And the first step in the forensic process that we use is to identify the presence of a hazard and to see also, were there any safeguards in place? And then using the diagram, we're going to analyze that unsafe interaction that had occurred between the child, the hazard, and their environment. So as an example, we have a classroom, a 6-year-old who has just finished their lunch and begins to run around inside the classroom. Another child has dropped their thermos, spilling liquid onto the floor. As the 6-year-old is running through the classroom, they step into that spill, they fall, they hit their head on the corner of a cabinet, and we have a deep laceration injury. This is how we're analyzing that injury occurring. The child, the hazard in the environment was the spill on the floor, as well as the unsafe behavior of running inside, and the environment was an unguarded spill. We have the next slide, please. So thinking about that example of the slip and fall, what should the teacher have done? What could they have done to provide for the standard of care? Well, caregivers control the hazards in their environment in a variety of ways. One, by modifying that environment. So for instance, in our example that we just spoke about, the teacher would have identified the potential hazard of water on the floor when the thermos was dropped. And what she then would have done would have gotten some towels or a mop that were available in the classroom and removed that hazard. If she wasn't able to remove the hazard, then she would guard it by taking some chairs from the classroom, quickly putting them around the wet area on the floor and creating a barrier so that the children in the classroom could not access that hazard of the wet floor. And then she'd also call out to them in a warning, reminding them to please, let's stay over on this area on the carpet, please, my friends, because I don't want you to trip and fall. I'm cleaning up the water from the floor. And let's remember, we have walking feet when we're in the classroom together to keep you safe. Those are the steps that she would go through. Also, another control that caregivers have is their procedures and their operations. There could be safety checklists that are established in the center and the facility, the staff assignments, and then in this case, also those classroom rules of walking feet in the classroom, running feet are for outside. So the child was the 6-year-old. The hazard was the running behavior that was not appropriate for the indoor environment, but also then the spill that was on the floor. And when those interacted together with an unguarded spill, we had the injury. Next slide, please. It's also important to establish in our standard of care the type of supervision that's being provided to the children at the time. When supervising, caregivers take into account the age and developmental abilities of the group of children that they're caring for. They also know that depending on whether they're in an indoor or an outdoor environment, that will affect the supervision that they're providing. Active supervision is important for minimizing the risk of hazards and injuries. And the components of active supervision are proper adult to child ratio. Adult to child ratios are established by the state licensing regulations and to be followed by the providers. Also, where is the adult in proximity to the children? Are they close enough so that they're able to hear what is going on and to intervene if needed? Adult caregivers also need to have a clear sight line of the entire area where the children are and visibility of the children at all times. Because they are familiar with their children and they know the developmental abilities and characteristics of the group. They're able to anticipate behaviors and then redirect or interact as needed to keep the children safe. So if we look at our photograph here, we see that we have a teacher and a group of 7 children in an outside environment, possibly on the playground. And we have 7 children, young children, who are sitting on the bench. And if you notice, their feet are dangling. So that's an indication to us that they're not stable on that bench. And they're crowded together on that bench. We also see, if we're going to look at the proper child to adult ratio, if the situation, for instance, is a small family childcare home, we know that the ratio is a 1:6. There's 7 children on the bench. So if that is the case here, the teacher would be out of ratio at the time. She's close to the kids. However, she has her back turned to them and she's distracted as she's talking on her phone. So she is not maintaining visibility of them as they're sitting on the bench. We talked about anticipating behavior. Well, young children of this age are very busy and wiggly. They don't like to be crowded. They like to have their space. And it wouldn't be unreasonable to anticipate that there might be a shove or a push that occurs, and our little one who's sitting on the end of the bench would end up being pushed off, falling to the hard surface below, and possibly injuring herself. So in this situation, our unsafe injury diagram indicates that the number of children on that bench, poor supervision, and the crowded situation can lead to that injury where there's a hard surface under the bench, resulting in an injury, as I said. Next slide, please. For our final case scenario, we're going to talk about a digit entrapment. And I want you for a moment to just imagine a 2-year-old classroom. In this classroom, there is a half door that's located in the room that connects the classroom space to a small kitchen preparation area. Only adults are allowed to enter into this work kitchen area. And there is a postage sign on the half door that says, please close door. Watch for children when going in and out of the door. Now, one of the 2-year-old teachers in the classroom opens the door, enters into the kitchen, and closes that door without looking behind to see where the location of children are in the room. And at the same time that she enters and enters the door, one of the 2-year-old children ventures and walks close to that door and has their hand near the open, unguarded hinge area space that's created. You can see a little diagram at the bottom that illustrates what I'm talking about. As the teacher closes the door, the child's finger is entrapped and her finger is severed. So we have to identify what is the hazard in this situation, in this scenario. It is that open, unguarded door hinge. My task then is to determine, was there a dangerous condition? What was the standard of care provided? Was there notice and causation? Yes, there was a dangerous condition because a 2-year-old child was able to access this unguarded door hinge. And there was failure in providing a standard of care because the lack of supervision occurred when the teacher entered and closed the door without visually checking to see where the other children in the room were located before doing so. There also wasn't a procedure in place that would have been an intervention method to ensure that the children were involved in as an example, a group activity, a story time on the rug, away from that area where the door was whenever an adult would enter that space. And the hazard was not guarded with the installation of a finger guard to prevent children from having their fingers go into that open space where the hinge is located. We know that they had notice. There was a posted warning sign on the door that said, "Watch for children when entering and exiting, opening and closing the door," and that was disregarded. There was also notice because children of this age, and again, she's a teacher in the 2-year-old classroom, so she's aware of the group of children and of their age and characteristics. The 2-year-olds are very curious, and they also will wander around and check out their environment. They'll explore their environment. And oftentimes, little ones, being curious, will follow after the adult caregivers in the classroom. So unfortunately, in this scenario, the teacher deviated from the standard of care for supervision and health and safety, and that resulted in the entrapment and loss of a finger of a little child. Next slide, please. I appreciate the opportunity to have spent some time with you this afternoon and to share a little bit about my work and about the kinds of potential hazards that are available in childcare centers, and the responsibility of those of us in the childcare field to ensure that those hazards are addressed, they're guarded, and our children are safe. Again, my name is Janice Inman, and my contact information is on the left. If you are interested in talking to myself or any of our Robson experts about casework, Jesse will share with you that process, and the information is listed on the right of the slide. Thank you so much.
I sure will. And Janice, thanks so much for the time you spent on these slides and putting this together. If anybody on the line has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us after the program by email. You can submit a form through our website. You can give us a call, whichever format suits you best. Janice, it has been an absolute pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And we hope that we see you all on a future Robson Forensic webinar. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us.